Well, the campaigns talk about this US presidential election being the most important of our time. But will it be free and fair? US intelligence agencies have issued a series of advisories in recent weeks, warning voters about potential problems. They run the gamut from the spread of disinformation to cyber attacks targeting election infrastructure. The president also claims to have seen evidence of vote rigging through mail-in ballots. Eric Tucker specialises in election security for Associated Press. I spoke with him earlier. Eric Tucker, thanks for joining Sky News Your World. Firstly, just how concerned are authorities in the US that this election won't be free and fair?
So I think we're already seeing a degree of foreign interference and foreign influence that in some ways resembles what we saw in 2016. So there's definitely concern and legitimate reason for concern. What we're hearing from US authorities is that most of the foreign interference is taking the form of influence operations that exist online. And by that, I mean the dissemination of fake news, of disinformation, of content that is meant to sow discord and concern and anxiety within the United States, and that is done under the guise of legitimacy, but is actually being produced by a foreign country.
What proof do we have that this is going on in 2020?
So there are a bunch of different methods that we're seeing that the United States intelligence community has already singled out publicly. One is what we call a campaign to denigrate and disparage the Democratic presidential nominee, Joe Biden. And that's taken the form of, at least in one situation, of a pro-Russia Ukrainian parliamentarian who has been releasing very derogatory, negative information about Joe Biden and his son Hunter in relation to past ties in Ukraine. And we know from what the U.S. intelligence community says is that this lawmaker who is behind this effort does indeed have connections to Russian intelligence. And there was a press release from the Treasury Department just a few weeks ago that identified him as an active Russian agent for over the last decade. So that's just one form of evidence that we're seeing.
Do you think there's a risk of people conflating concerted efforts from actual foreign entities with genuine, worthy journalism? Now, you gave the example of Hunter Biden's alleged corruption. Perhaps nowadays, because there is so much talk of alleged foreign interference, that genuine criticism of candidates, or candidates' sons in this case, can be dismissed as foreign interference?
That's a very interesting question. There's no doubt about it. I think the concern is the origins of the information. And so when the U.S. intelligence community assesses that the information that's being released by a foreign entity or actor is designed to have an influence in the election or to shape a particular American's point of view, whether it's for Trump or anti-Trump or for Biden or anti-Biden, I think that's the concern, is that Americans might be relying on foreign sources of information to decide how they should select their presidential victor. And I think that that's a concern from the perspective of U.S. authorities.
Are the impacts of such efforts being overstated, though? For example, in the 2016 election, some pointed to a few memes on social media as bringing down Hillary Clinton's billion-dollar campaign. Do you think that the impact of the alleged foreign interference is being overstated?
That's a very interesting question, and certainly we in the media, we ask ourselves that quite a bit, and we have conversations internally in newsrooms about to what extent that is a reality or that that's happening. I agree in the sense that some of the websites and content that are pushing out this information are not websites that the average American would have ever heard of or would visit. I think the concern becomes with what some in the United States call information laundering, which is where a bit of information that's on a random obscure website suddenly gets peddled out into more mainstream sources.
Now, you've also delved into other areas of possible threats to the integrity of the US election. It goes beyond foreign actors trying to sow discord, doesn't it?
It certainly does. One of the real concerns is obvious foreign attempts to actually attack the election infrastructure on election day. One of those concerns takes the form of ransomware, which, as you know, is a malicious software that basically shuts down a network, shuts down a system until a ransom is paid. And in the interim period, personal information can be obtained and then leaked online. There's also a concern about what they call distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks, which is when a server is inundated with a massive flood of requests that overload it, overwhelm it, and shut it down and knock it offline. One thing that U.S. authorities has been warning about or sort of advising about is that there have to be backup plans. These state and local election officials have to be resilient, have to assume that something bad could happen.
And Eric, what do you make of the talk of mail-in ballots? Are they a safe method of voting, or do you share the president's concerns?
There is not evidence of any sort of widespread mail-in ballot fraud. So there are 5 states that rely on it, that send them out to voters as a matter of course. And in those 5 states, there have not been reports about serious widespread problems. And so there's not evidence yet to suggest that it's a system that is especially vulnerable to abuse. It is certainly the case that there could be isolated instances of misconduct, of fraud, of poor handling of ballots. But the notion that the rapid expansion into mail-in balloting is going to cause widespread fraud, I just don't see that is necessarily the expected outcome, and based on past precedent.
So given all the possible election interference, isn't it fair for the losing presidential candidate not to immediately accept the result?
That's a great question, and that's something that people have been asking, certainly in the media, as to whether President Trump's attacks on the mail-in voting system are designed to lay the groundwork, no matter what happens and no matter what the vote count says, for some sort of post-election challenge. There's no question that this election is going to look different than past elections, and that the rapid expansion and the abrupt expansion of mail-in balloting is going to create new challenges. I think that's a safe belief and assumption. Whether either candidate, whether Trump or Biden, chooses to make that claim is sort of unclear, but it seems reasonable to expect, based on the president's own comments, that he's going to find fault if he loses with the voting system, and that may be a basis for him to challenge it after the fact.